And that's my cue to make introductions. And I think the police put the spotlight on me and my guest, Ed Curtin. Hi, my name is Chuck Fall. I'm the president of Truth Action Project and a media activist leading tonight's TAP Forum. TAP is an educational media organization dedicated to advancing truth action in a country of lies. There's a TAP media team advancing our TAP Forum tonight. And I'm reminded to invite you all to like us, to share us on social media so we can build our ranks. At the end of the program tonight, we will give Bill Jacoby, our founder of Truth Action Project, an opportunity to share a word about TAP and building our movement. We will end the recording, but visitors may stay on for additional chit-chat and sharing around. The ideas explored in tonight's discussion are not necessarily the views of TAP organization. Finally, this conversation will continue on Friday at our campfire event. Please register for that. Our guest tonight is Ed Curtin, a prolific writer of truth narratives who is trained in the classics as a religious studies scholar and who has also taught in the university for many years. He has a website, edwardcurtin.com, and he can be found at Global Research Canada. So we're going to go directly to Ed, and I'm going to ask that, Ed, if you give us a brief background on your experience as an academic, a writer, and a student of what I'm inclined to call the Truth and Freedom movement. Ed, take the floor, make introductions, and give us some background on your experience as a truth seeker.
Well, thanks, Chuck. Sure, I'll be brief. I was once, I started out as a professor of theology, and that didn't last very long. And I then became a professor of sociology. And so most of my academic career, I have been a professor of sociology with a specialty in the sociology of religion and politics. So as they intersect with society. And in terms of writing, I started writing long ago in my 20s. And for years and years, I would publish in small magazines, in newspapers. I was once a newspaper columnist. I would write for newspapers and magazines, as well as academic writing in the field of sociology and religion and that kind of stuff, how they came together, or come together, I should say. So that's my academic background. I grew up in New York City in the North Bronx, a few blocks away from my friend Raymond McGovern, the ex-CIA analyst, and his younger brother was a friend of mine. And it's an interesting story, our backgrounds and how they're entwined. And then once the internet came along, it gave me the opportunity to publish quickly, like it did for other people, which has its ups and its downs, its negatives and its positives. But I was able to get stuff out much quicker, which is what I did. And for a long time now, I've been publishing essays, articles on the internet at my own site, and they're picked up by many other sites. So that's about it. That's my background.
Well, I appreciate that, and we're going to talk about. We're going to go. Well, let me just say that I discovered you, I don't know, 2 years ago, And it was like, what a breath of fresh air. It was like, being high up in the mountains and feeling wheezy and taking a breath of oxygen is what I, as an intellectual and as a, political truther, that's what reading you gave me. And so I'm really honored and pleased to be with you. I'm really honored and pleased to be part of TAP and that we're hosting you. So let's just get straight into it. And we're going to talk about speaking truth in a country of lies. This is a collection of essays that you've compiled into a book, and that would go ahead. Let's get that image on our for our viewers to see. And you're writing about truth. Okay, so you're speaking truth in a country of lies. So I want you to explain what truth you're talking about and what lies you're saying need to be unveiled. And I did talk to you on the phone earlier today, and we can get right into this around what truth are we talking about. Historical truth is something you've used. I use the language political truth, but we also live in a world of moral relativism where, my truth is subjective and so on. So what truth are we talking about? What lies do you find problematic? So unpack this. What do you tell people when they ask you, what is your book about?
Well, the title is revealing, I think. The important word in the title is seeking. And if you read the introduction to the book, you will see that I don't feel like I've arrived at all of these so-called truths, but I'm always searching, always. And you're never really there fully. On many issues, you might feel like you are, and I do on some issues, but on others, it's still a journey. It's a seeking, and the cover of the book is upside down. The road is, at least, which I think was a really good choice for the picture on the cover, because the world seems like it's upside down. And it did when I put that book out, and I'm working on a couple of others at the moment. But yeah, there's the cover. I love that cover. I think it was a perfect choice. In any case, yes, as you said, Chuck, there are different types of truth. Well, I presume, too, that your listeners might share my belief that the United States of America is a country of lies. It's not all lies, obviously, but there's so many lies being told and have been told down through the decades that it's rather mind-boggling for a person to know what's going on much of the time. And some of the most important issues in our lives have been hidden behind the veil of propaganda. And so my concept of the truth in a general sense would be, I would go back to the Greek word for truth, which is ancient, aletheia, which means an uncovering. And if something needs to be uncovered, something is being hidden. And so in the political realm, that's obviously true. In the philosophical realm, that is true as well. And perhaps in the theological realm as well. So, there are truths and there are bigger truths. You mentioned the relativity of knowledge, or the relativity of truths, which comes straight out of the late 1800s with Friedrich Nietzsche and other philosophers, including someone like Sigmund Freud, who was of that same generation. And the idea that these people put forth and was accepted actually by sociologists, but I have questioned that down through the years, is that all knowledge, everything we know, everything we believe is relative. And it's relative to the times in which we live and the historical period and the knowledge that we have access to, which makes sense in a certain way. In other words, we're fallible, we're not gods, we can make mistakes, and blah, blah, blah. However, when people start to say everything is relative, which is a common phrase, I'm sure you've all heard it, that is an absolute statement, which contradicts the statement itself. If everything is relative, you're making a statement that is absolute when you're trying to say nothing's absolute. And so there is this enigma with this phrase and this whole idea of relativity. And without going too far into this philosophical, sociological issue, I think we live in an era now where most people feel like everything's relative. You never know, which is false. You can know. There are some things you can't know, but there are other things you can know. But it is a propaganda motif to say you'll never know. You'll never know. And we have to keep looking into this forever and ever. So I don't know if that helps a little bit to clarify.
Well, it more than helps. It does clarify, and it provides important context, because we are in a war of propaganda, and we all have experienced the kind of you'll never know. We'll never know. And so don't say what really happened, because we'll never know. And this is part of this is a cross that TAP is bearing. In other words, we're arguing we can know. There are things we can know. We can discern, and we can add up the evidence, and we can connect dots, and we can draw logical conclusions, and so on. And so let me read a quick statement. This is my opinion, but I'm going to make an argument. I'm going to suggest that, for the record, we in the truth movement here at TAP probably are at a consensus, and that we accept that lies have been and are being told about a host of issues ranging from JFK to September 11th and to the current COVID program. And all of these lies have caused the military-industrial complex to grow, and our civil liberties and basic sovereign rights, freedom and liberty, have become diminished by national security law, such that we already may be living under a state of totalitarianism. And I'm using that word not necessarily hyperbolically, but I'm using it, and it's a strong, scathing, cutting word, but I'm using it, and this is me personally. And we may not know this. The federal COVID mandate was a big reveal, in my opinion, and it was a form of totalitarianism. There was a mandate. So let's start at the beginning. There's a beginning here. I think the beginning is 1947, when the National Security Act was filed. However, let's start with Eisenhower's warning about the military-industrial complex. And you discuss this in your essays. It's thick with your topic. Eisenhower warned the nation about the military-industrial complex. John F. Kennedy, I suggest, heeded the warning. He was assassinated. There were subsequent 1960s assassinations. So this is a big traumatic event that hangs over our nation. But I want to go back, and I want you to just discuss this, and I want you to help us understand, why did Eisenhower make that warning? What was he warning about? What happened to our country when all these people were killed in the 60s? We're going to talk about JFK, about James Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable. And we can get that image relative ready, and that's going to be part of what we talk about in this response. So I'm interested in the argument that the deep state owes we the people for denying the country historical possibilities we could have gotten if the leaders in the 60s weren't murdered. So Eisenhower warned the nation about the military-industrial complex. There was a slew of murders in the 60s. Just give me your thoughts, please, on all of that, and then with an understanding that history was stolen from us. What are your thoughts on this kind of reasoning that I'm displaying to you? Chuck out.
Well, many thoughts. First, I would say, obviously, Eisenhower was right to make that warning. And secondly, I'd say, well, it's always convenient for people on their way out the door to give a warning. But for 8 years as president, he presided over the military-industrial complex and the war in Korea, and with Richard Nixon at his side, preparing the Bay of Pigs and okaying the assassination of foreign leaders. I'm talking about Dwight Eisenhower now. So in any case, he was right about it, of course. And then when Kennedy came into office, right away, the Bay of Pigs was operation went into effect 2 months after he was inaugurated. Let's say February, March, 3 months. And before that, people that he supported in Africa were assassinated, but I won't go into all of that. And Kennedy was trying gradually to end the military-industrial complex. This is very, very clear from the documentation of especially the last year of his life. He refused after the Bay of Pigs in 1961, in April, he eventually fired that year Allen Dulles, who was the key planner of it, and his top assistant, General Cobble, who, for those who don't know, some of you probably know, when Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963, the mayor of Dallas was that General Cobble's brother, which is extraordinary, of course, who was working with the CIA, the mayor of Dallas, the brother of the guy Kennedy fired 2 years before with Allen Dulles. And then Allen Dulles, of course, became the prime guy on the Warren Commission after the killing of President Kennedy. So obviously there was a fix-in, and Kennedy was killed by deep state forces, the CIA primarily. However, in the last year of his life, Kennedy gave a very, very famous and important speech at American University, June 10th, 1963, in which he called for the end of the Cold War, the end of nuclear weapons, reconciliation with the Soviet Union, a very impassioned and beautiful, beautiful, famous speech, which drove the CIA and the military and the right-wing elements crazy. And he concluded a test ban treaty with the Soviet Union. He put forth a document in the fall of 1963, I'm getting my years mixed up, calling for the withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam, National Memo 263 it was, and it said 1,000 troops out by the end of December, and all American advisors, they weren't soldiers fighting, they were advisors. There were 16,000 of them, all of them out in 2 years. And the war in Vietnam is ending. It's not going to go on. And I could go on with other things that he did. But then, of course, when he was assassinated on the 22nd of November, 60 years ago, Johnson immediately started to institute changes to all of this, specifically the war in Vietnam, which he escalated dramatically. And it went on for year after year after year after year under Johnson, and then under Richard Nixon. So Kennedy was killed by the CIA, and he was killed to send a message to future presidents that if you want to end our wars, we have a gun at your head, and don't forget it. You see what we did in public space in Dallas on the 22nd of November? We can blow your head off, and we will not hesitate. And then, of course, with the other killings, without going into all the details, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Bobby Kennedy, all killed by the same forces. It's documentary evidence. People will say, well, oh, no, it's a conspiracy theory. That's nonsense. That's nonsense. And again, I think your listeners know that the conspiracy theory meme was conjured out of thin air by the Central Intelligence Agency in 1968. And it's been used ever since. This afternoon, my wife said, oh, look, there's a front page article on the Guardian newspaper. And it was about the Secret Service agent who was protecting Jacqueline Kennedy on that fatal day in Dallas. His name, what's his name? I forget his name at the moment. But it was a piece of propaganda, the article. But this stuff appears constantly. There'll be a lot more of it in the next week before the 22nd. But there's plenty of evidence that deep state forces, the intelligence, the military, killed these people. If you want to do your homework.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you then, and just on that note, because I have an associate, an activist associate, who actually characterizes the JFK assassination as a 1963 coup, and I accept that. I accept that this was a military-industrial complex project. We're not going to go into go down rabbit holes around the details of all of that, but I think what you're communicating is a kind of just a sober assessment, a kind of a clinical reading of history that reveals of what's true around what happened. And so let's just give a brief remark about James Douglas's JFK and the Unspeakable. We have an image of the book cover, and for me, that was a profound report and way to think. And I wrote a book review on it, and it's posted to the TAP website. And I basically conclude that book from James Douglas, where he appeals to Thomas Merton's sensibility, and he weaves this understory of resistance to mad scientists that were, running our military-industrial complex, that were calculating, we could lose 25 million against the 50 million from the Russians if we nuke, and so on. And this was what Kennedy was immersed in and responding to and reacting to. So just briefly, I know you know this book. I think you're acquainted with James Douglas and the importance of this work and speaking to these unspeakable things. Just give us a remark about James Douglas, that book, and how this is perhaps very important for us today to talk about building a movement that's dedicated to peace and dismantling the military-industrial complex. Chuck, out your thoughts.
Well, Jim Douglas's book is by far, in my opinion, the best book ever written on the JFK assassination. I'm not alone in that view. I should say, Jim is a dear friend of mine, but I think I'm being very, very objective when I say his book is so important. And after Oliver Stone's work, beginning with his movie JFK in the 90s, and then all the openings that took place after that, Jim places the killing of President Kennedy within this context of what Thomas Merton called the unspeakable. There were things, and again, I think the book was published in 2008, as I recall. It might have been 2009, but even at that point in time, there were things that you could not really say publicly. I mean, I know because I've been banned from websites, prominent websites, for saying the CIA killed President Kennedy. Today, these days, not 2008, and not you can't say that. And I've been told you can't say that, and I say, well, I'm saying it, and then okay, but then we don't publish that. That's all. And I said, fine. This has happened numerous times to me. But in any case, Thomas Merton, it's something that is so evil that it can't be spoken. And the JFK assassination was one example. But in Jim Douglas's book, he lays out a story of how John Kennedy had what can only be called a spiritual metanoia, a spiritual change of heart. Not that he was like some crazy Cold Warrior when he came into office, because he wasn't. He had a little bit of that, but he also had a lot of the other, which is another interesting story. But he tells the story of how Kennedy knew, and he knew he was going to have to die if he was going to accomplish his goal of bringing the end of the Cold War, the end of the Vietnam War. And Jim Douglas, in this extraordinary story, which is filled with factual information as well, shows how John Kennedy really was the ultimate hero who was willing to give up his life for not just his country, but for the world. And he knew they were coming for him. He knew they were going to try to kill him, which they did. And so that book is really important. And I should say, it sells very well today. A lot of people are reading that book still. And Jim Douglas is coming out with a new book. And that book is going to be quite something.
Well, just say a brief word about it. What's he pulling together?
Well, I can't say too much. I will just say it concerns very similar matters that would be of interest to everyone listening here. Okay. And I think it will be of great interest to the people in power as well.
Well, Oliver Stone has said this, and I know everybody's on the fence about who's virtuous and all of this and who's not. But Oliver Stone has just, as in the course of his argument, made the case and argued, and I think it's an argument that I pick up from Jim Douglas, which is that history was stolen from us, that the nation was ripped off by the deep state, and that part of our movement should rhetorically be to claim what was stolen. In other words, we should be imagining the possibilities if John Kennedy wasn't killed, if Malcolm wasn't killed, if Martin, Robert, and Fred Hampton and others weren't killed, were allowed and were tolerated for their efforts to reach some fruition. I think this is a legitimate thing to complain about and argue for, but that's my opinion.
Could I say?
And I don't. Do you have a thought on what I just said, Ed?
Yeah, just not really my thought, but a woman who wrote a very good book on the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy, whose son is now running for president. Her name is Lisa Peace, and in her book, Lisa said that a way of summarizing the 1960s was the decade when the CIA took over the country completely.
Okay.
And I agree with that.
Okay, then that's perfect closure to the 60s. So then that created the conditions, that lack of any accountability for that period of time created the conditions for September 11th.
Oh,
So
yeah.
let's talk about your friend Graham McQueen, because you wrote essays about this. You wrote an essay, a tribute to him, and let's put a picture of Graham McQueen. Just talk about him. Talk about 9/11 as the another. You could go into the woods around Project for New American Century. But clearly 9/11, the subsequent anthrax, the Patriot Act, in effect cemented the power of military-industrial complex and the plutocracy behind it. So why is Graham McQueen so important, such a hero? Talk about the movie, talk about 9/11. We can just talk. Let's just unpack this and go for it. What are your thoughts on 9/11, given what we've just talked about in the work your friend has done?
Sure. Well, I think there's a direct link between the Kennedy assassination, which is the foundational event, the first Kennedy assassination. There are multiple Kennedy assassinations, but JFK, foundational event. And 2001, Graham has, I see his face there looking at me, and I feel very sad. He died in April of this year, April 25th, I think, after having cancer for many years and fighting against it and doing really good work. But he wrote a book. Most people are focused on the events of that Tuesday, September 11, 2001. But Graham wrote a book called the 2001 Anthrax Deception, which is really a profoundly important book, because many people don't know much about the anthrax attacks. They vaguely might remember that there were these letters sent with anthrax spores in them to a couple of senators and other people. A few people died as a result. However, in Graham's book, he shows very, very clearly that this was linked to the events of the 11th of September. This all happened in weeks after the attacks of September 11th. And he shows in an extraordinary work of logic and evidence that these attacks came from the U.S. government. They came out of a U.S. government lab. They were linked back to Mohammed Atta, who was said to be the mastermind, not the mastermind, but the leader of these 19 terrorists who allegedly hijacked these planes and flew them into the World Trade Centers and Pentagon and into a field in Pennsylvania, blah, blah, blah. But he shows how they're linked. And by showing how they're linked, he proves them both. And that was just the beginning of his work, or the most fundamentally important part of it. But he also has documented how The buildings' collapses were caused by bombs placed within the buildings, that they were controlled demolition. They didn't come down because of the planes, the two towers, and then Building 7. And so he really ties it all together. And Graham and I were close friends, and I always used to laugh with him, and I'd say, hey, you're a little too strict with your logic and evidence. And he said, yeah, I am. I want to be precise. And that was his great, great strength, and his desire to seek the truth. So he's a really important guy.
So he made the movie Peace, War, and 9/11. Is that the title? Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, that's the recent movie.
Okay, that's the movie. I watched it, Peace, War, 9/11, and he's featured in it. And
yeah, it's a beautiful movie because he is speaking, and plus all the evidence is marshaled from beginning to end. And this was shortly before he died.
Let me just say that the TAP has its origins as an organization named 9/11 TAP, and it grows out of the 9/11 Truth Movement. And so the work is important because it's part of what we need to be doing. Obviously, is an ongoing media campaign in our own right to get the truth out. But then we're hitting up against the popular cognitive dissonance, a media machine that pulls no quarters and blanketly tells lies. So I just wanted to highlight Graham McQueen. You have a great essay you wrote as tribute to him. The movie is excellent. Ted Walters is the director. Maybe someone can just, I want to keep moving because I know there's Q&A coming up here, and I have a few more questions I want to work through here. And I really appreciate, because what I want to talk about is you have an essay, an epistle to Robert Kennedy. An epistle is what is an epistle exactly? What form of?
It's a letter.
Okay, so it's a letter.
It's a letter, and well, I took it because it has a biblical resonance, the New Testament.
Okay.
In the
it's a letter that speaks to a moral concern, I think.
Yeah.
And so let me just say that you wrote an epistle to Robert Kennedy, and you essentially condemn him for caving to the Israeli lobby and losing his moral sense of what is right in the matter of the Israeli bombardment of Gaza. So, I mean, I'm going to just go deep end here. Is Robert Kennedy playing the role of a controlled opposition in that he's creating a division among Americans over how to think about the military-industrial complex and the ruling plutocracy? And I'll just add that I'm active in a medical freedom. Children's Health Defense is a great organization I'm in solidarity with. Robert Kennedy was kind of the leader of it. He's running for president. But now, in his stance for Israel and the Israeli narrative around the problem of the Palestinians and the right to self-defense and all of that, is creating a big kind of problem and catastrophe in our own intellectual senses around who do we align with and who's of importance and who do we stand in solidarity with and who's speaking truth to power. So talk about your epistle and your reflections on Robert Kennedy and what he's undergoing and doing and what's going on there. Chuck out.
Well, I would say this. I don't condemn Bobby Kennedy.
Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. My language.
Not at all.
Okay.
Who am I to condemn him?
Yeah.
I think he in so many ways, a very good man, and who has brought a lot of important issues to the fore and has I supported him before he declared his candidacy.
Mhm.
I wrote an article about him before he said he was going to run for president. And I said, he's the man for the job. And I supported him going years back on other things that he's done. And I love him in that way. However, when he, in June of this year, reneged on his support for Roger Waters, the British singer, who is a longtime Palestinian supporter, and did so. He took back his praise for Roger Waters because under pressure, they were saying Bobby Kennedy's an anti-Semite, anti-Jewish. You know, some Arabs are Semites too, so it's a misnomer. But he was anti-Semite. But we knew that stuff was coming even before he declared his candidacy. And then he marched with Rabbi Shmuley in New York City, and he let Rabbi Shmuley say that very day that Saran killed Bobby's father. And Bobby Kennedy knows and has been very public that Saran did not kill his father, that the CIA hitman killed his father, and that Saran should be released from prison. And yes, he had a gun, he fired a gun, but he was a patsy. He was a patsy. But that was really something. And so for months and months, privately, I have tried to get Bobby to change his mind on his virulent support for the Israeli government against the Palestinians. And he wouldn't do that. And he kept pushing back. And finally, I felt I had to speak to him publicly, to speak to the deepest part of his spiritual core and say, Bobby, you know, you're better than this. You're better than this. You have to. So you wonder if he is, what was the phrase you used, Chuck? If he is he's not a sleeper.
A controlled opposition.
I don't think so. I just think he's fundamentally wrong on this issue, but it's a very, very disturbing issue because now he has gotten rid of Dennis Kucinich, a very experienced politician who was his campaign manager, who was a Palestinian supporter for years and years, and he's replaced Dennis with his daughter-in-law, Amaryllis Fox, who's an ex-CIA agent.
It's weird. It's
beyond weird.
It's beyond weird. And so let's drop it at that, and people can go read your. I think there's a lot of people in the movement, the truth movement, the people who want to make the country better, who look for good leaders. This verges on catastrophic that Kennedy will not rise above the fray. And it's contradictory. It's too weird. And I don't want to get bogged down in Robert Kennedy. I just wanted to reflect on that. And it deeply saddens me. I actually I'm involved in the Green Party, and I made an argument that the Green Party should recruit Dennis Kucinich to run for president on some basic points that we could all agree on around peace and liberating from the banking cartels by advancing the constitutional provision that Congress makes our money supply, and you point out that has some heart and humanity for the Palestinian cause. This is all about advancing a peace program. The peace program necessarily means dismantling the military-industrial complex and the power behind it. So and I know your material you reflect on all of this. Let's bring this up to the whole Israeli event in Gaza. So I want you to reflect, if you would. I know you're not an expert in military affairs, and no, you're not Scott Ritter or anyone else, but You've lived long and you're wise and you understand the ways of the world. And so my question is, how is the Israeli attack on Gaza, which stems from that October 7th, Hamas attack, part of a big picture power play by the same military industrial complex that Eisenhower warned the nation about 2 days before Kennedy assumed the presidency? You've pointed out there's a connection between Kennedy's assassination and 9/11. Do you see a connection between 9/11 and the events that Israel is unleashing on northern Gaza? That's my question. What are your thoughts?
Well, no, I'm not Scott Ritter, but I might say, like Scott, I was once in the Marine Corps, and actually I became a conscientious objector out of the Marines, unlike Scott. But Scott's written recently about Bobby Kennedy, also similar to what I have said. What are my thoughts? Well, my first thought is that President Kennedy would be appalled at what's going on, and so would his brother Robert, because President Kennedy, let's just stick with him for the moment, was strongly opposed to the Israelis getting nuclear weapons, and the Israelis hated him for this, and he was pressuring them and pressuring them and pressuring them. He said he was going to cut off all aid if the U.S. did not gain access to the Israeli nuclear testing site, which they said wasn't for nuclear weapons. But he didn't live long enough to carry this out. And then Lyndon Johnson, of course, was one of the best friends Israel has ever had. The shooting or the killing of, I think, 37 U.S. sailors on the USS Liberty and blah, blah, blah. So what's going on now? It's all part of a long history, obviously, with the Palestinians and the Israelis. I don't know whether or not this was an event that was allowed to happen by Netanyahu and his people, or whether it was inadvertently happened. But it seems like there was a lot of warnings that this was going to happen. There was going to be some kind of breakout out of Gaza, and Netanyahu ignored it. And I would say that what he's doing now is genocide, is massive killing, completely supported by Joseph Biden, and through his silence, supported by Bobby Kennedy, who on October 8th or 9th gave his full support to the Israeli government. And they've been killing thousands of children, innocent people, 11,000 or so as of now. As we're talking, they're dying in Gaza, in hospitals, in the streets, they're being bombed. And the United States sends more money to Israel for more bombs. And these are U.S. bombs that are being used against the Gazans, the Palestinians, I should say. And they're killing them in the West Bank. And this is all with U.S. aid. And we're sending more money to Israel. They don't need our money. They got enough weapons to kill a lot of people. We've been giving them this money for years and years and years. So yeah, it's a boon. It's great for the military-industrial complex, just like the war in Ukraine. And those two things are linked, of course. Right. What the hell are we doing in Ukraine? This is crazy. But we're instituting a new Cold War against Russia, but it never stops. So yeah, I see all these events as being linked in a large, military, industrial, complex sort of way. CIA is deeply involved in all this, always, always, always.
Well, and I just remind, people and everyone on this list knows this. We've all heard it. But it's just the 9/11, soon after the 9/11 event, we were told to expect forever wars. I mean, that was it. And lo and behold, Afghanistan, 2003, Iraq, huge numbers turn out in protests before the war even started to say don't go to war, but they went to war anyway. And Libya, Syria, and then the day that COVID is declared over, the Ukraine war starts. It's almost like, what? You can't make this stuff up.
Right.
So certainly people in the truth movement feel like we're being played, and we need to develop a narrative of opposition and so on to this. And I think the peace movement is part of that. The peace movement is kind of something that the truth movement needs to be carrying a lot of water for. So let me just ask another question here. On the matter of controlled opposition, on the matter of conditioned propaganda, you've written about this in one of the essay on radical, being radical, and I might read the quote from it. On the matter of controlled opposition, key public thought leaders like Noam Chomsky and Chris Hedges will not speak about September 11th as a state crime. They won't even suggest a cover-up of a crime has occurred, much less demand an independent investigation. Are they just protecting their professional positions, or do they hold responsibility for covering up with their silence? It seems there is a glass ceiling for expressing historical truth that claims state crimes. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Both those guys, Noam Chomsky and Chris Hedges, it's not just 9/11 that they won't discuss.
Right.
They will not discuss JFK. Chomsky says, "Oh yeah, he got killed." It's not important anyway, because individuals don't matter. It's all social analysis. It's all structural analysis. People don't make any difference. And Kennedy was a warmonger, and blah blah blah. Noam Chomsky has some kind of hatred for the Kennedys that's off the charts. It's like crazy. Only a psychiatrist could really untangle it. But he's been doing this since the 1960s about Kennedy and the Kennedy assassination. And then he has a lot of proteges, people who are always quoting Noam Chomsky. And Chris Hedges is one of them. And Chris refuses to go there on those two issues also. But he basically says the U.S. government story about 9/11 is correct. It's as if he's never read a book. He's never done any study. He's never looked into all the great work by David Ray Griffin, which, inspired me. It inspired Graham and other people. And by the way, David then wrote a bunch of books criticizing U.S. foreign policy, a bunch of really good books, 2 or 3. A brilliant guy, a very courageous guy. He spoke out all the time. But there are a lot of other people besides Noam Chomsky and Chris Hedges. Only they could answer the question why. I've written some stuff about Chris, who writes some excellent stuff. And this is where the enigma is. He's written some great articles, and at the same time, there's a place he won't go. He used to work for the New York Times, and then he either got fired or he quit over the Iraq War. So, what does he have to lose at this? And Chomsky's 94 years old.
Yeah. What does he have to lose? Jeez.
Yeah.
He could do a bedside confession before he passes.
There won't be one.
There won't be one. Yeah. Well, okay. So this is a problem. This is what we're up against. So I have 2 more questions, then we're going to open it up to Q&A. Let's talk about Albert Camus, existentialism. You could even reflect on your own, life as a Catholic and how you've evolved in your philosophy. You said that Albert Camus is not an existentialist. Talk to us about kind of the existentialist philosophy, the emphasis on responsibility, how that could, feed a truth movement, how we should use someone like Albert Camus to inspire us even. You do invoke Albert Camus in your essays. He was a French philosopher who sadly died young. What about Camus moves you to cite him in your work? What does he call us to do as human beings? What are your thoughts?
Well, I should let me preface my thoughts on Albert Camus with this. Most of the work that I have done, I consider as much, I don't want to be presumptuous, but as art as well as political analysis. So everything I write, I try to write in the most artistic way I can, both in form and content, because, from a young age, it is literature and philosophy that inspired me. Poetry, novels, essays. And Albert Camus was a very early example. He inspired me with his early essays when he was in his early 20s. He has a book called Lyrical and Critical Essays. I stole the title, the subtitle of my book, a little from Albert. But he wrote, I'll just mention some of the titles of his books. He wrote The Stranger. He wrote The Plague, which is very appropriate to the whole COVID propaganda story. And he was considered, people call him an existentialist, but he was linked with Jean-Paul Sartre, who was an existentialist. And they both were allegedly atheists. I don't think Camus was, even though at times he said he was. There's a lot more to him than meets the eye. But basically, let's just call them both existentialists for argument's sake. They emphasized responsibility. And they emphasize the fact that, there are no excuses. You as an individual, as a moral person on this earth, must make choices and don't make excuses. You have to live an ethical life, and wherever those ethics come from, and you have to have honor. Tell the truth. Don't be a liar. And the theme of lying goes through all of their work. I often think of, my book says In a Country of Lies, but most people lie all the time. On an individual basis, little lies, often, but there are a lot of big lies that people tell too. They lie to themselves, and they lie, well, you can't really lie to yourself, but because you're the same person, as Sartre says. How could you lie to yourself? You would know you were lying, right? I mean, you're the one lying, but you're the one receiving the lie? No, that's illogical. It makes no sense. But I think the reason that he was so important to me was that he meditated on the prime things: death, responsibility, freedom, and fighting against evil forces. Camus was a staunch opponent of, for example, the the Soviet invasion of Hungary in 1956. And there's even speculation that the Soviets assassinated Camus, and that he did not die in a car crash in 1960. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. I've read the book. I've been in touch with the Italian author, but I've not reached a conclusion. It's possible, but he was just an inspiration to me in so many ways, to a generation of people, really, to many people.
Well, okay. And here's I appreciate that. And I posted into the chat. I'm active on posting at a Green Liberty Caucus website. I found I read from Global Research. You post heavily there. Michel Chossudovsky is a wonderful intellectual. Someone else wrote a short little reflection on Albert Camus. And Camus has a passage in there where he explicitly says we should be responding to our indignation at the big lies, at the violence that's perpetrated by these big lies, that we should live with some rage about that, and we should act on that. And I'll also note that Petr Kropotkin, the anarchist prince from Russia, who grew up aristocratic but witnessed slavery among the Russian peasant, and just felt how wrong it was as a humanitarian, as a person in his, felt, and that inspired him to advance a theory of freedom in his anarchist philosophical writings and so on. So I'm going to ask a final question, and then we're going to open it up to questions, and hands are going up. John has his, I don't know who's got their hands up. John gets to go first unless there's others, and I'm going to ask that Trina help me. After we ask this last question, Claudio is going to play the clip from the intro to the Graham McQueen, to his movie, and then we'll go into Q&A, and we're going to wrap up at the top of the second hour. I think that's what our plan is, and then we'll end our recording, and people can hang out for some chit chat afterwards. So here's my final question to you, and I'm going to read a paragraph. It's a series. Just how can the truth movement advance a liberation movement? So what exactly are we liberating from? What issues do we need to highlight and leverage? And I'm just kind of spinning off of this. You appeal in your writings for a reverence for life, and you make a strong critique of the transhumanist technocratic movement to augment human form with machine, which is anti-nature, in my opinion. There is an emerging techno-totalitarianism. So I'm asking you to speak to building a resistance movement, but also to advance a vision for a better society. This is a big mouthful, and I would like your thoughts on this. Where does the truth movement go relative toward the possibilities of liberation? Okay, so this is my last question, and we're going to go into you're going to answer. We're going to do a clip from McQueen film, and then we're going to go into Q&A, and John Olson is first online. So what are your thoughts on that question, Ed?
Well, that's a major question. I'm not much of a strategist, that's for sure. But I would go back to Camus, and many of you probably heard a famous quote of his when he said, "In the midst of winter, I discovered I had within me an invincible summer." And Camus, while being dedicated to fighting oppression wherever he saw it, also emphasized the fact that we must enjoy life and to the fullest while we fight, let's call it evil, in the world. And so I would say to myself, I need to be reminded, and to everyone, that is something that should be emphasized continually, that there's two parts to this. It's fighting the good fight, but also living life to the fullest and enjoying it, because there is no point in fighting just for fighting's sake. We're on this earth to enjoy life as well. So I would say that. And as for technology, I would say we have to cut out of, I mean, here I am on a Zoom call with you in front of a computer, which is not my strength. You can see I have a kind of half-ass setup here because I don't like this kind of stuff very much. But I think technology is a great, great, great danger. And I think the internet is a great, great danger. And we're being inundated with too much information which just muddles our brains and our ability to think. We're on these cell phones all the time. Again, I'm not some great person. I just don't have a cell phone because I'm on the computer too much already. What the hell do I want a cell phone? I want to be out of touch, not in touch all the time. But I want to be in touch with the natural world. And so I would say, to emphasize this technology, sure, it's good to a certain extent, but to another extent, we've completely overdone it. And as I said to you earlier in the day, Chuck, the greatest achievement of technology in the 20th century is nuclear weapons. That's the epitome of technological achievement, the ability to destroy the entire planet, kill everyone. So just meditating on that for a minute, where do people think we're going with all this technology? We're going to be robots? We're going to download ourselves into computers? Well, there's a lot of people who are pushing for this stuff, for this inhuman world. So somehow I think we have to emphasize all these things in some. I don't know how to do it.
Well, that's fine. I put a lot on you, and I know, I don't. You're not responsible for figuring out the revolution. Come on, goodness gracious, I was teasing you even and posing that question, but what I get from you is a moral compass, and that's something I think our truth movement needs to communicate. And I know people are working across the spectrum of issues, from the medical freedom to opposing this unfolding 5G and all the technology. Our space is littered with these satellites, and we are. I'm almost ranting, and I'm going to stop myself because there's questions out there, and we're going to. Well, actually, I need to turn to Bill Jacoby, because he's going to get the wrap up of our time together directly, Ed, and the audience and the people in the group here, and then we're going to, I think we could. I'd like to just turn to Claudio to give us we'll close out our time with, so to speak, and then we're going to go to John for Q&A. And then others can ask Q&A, and you can use the hand signal, or you can just put the word stack in the chat. So Bill, give us a wrap up about TAP, about what people can do to support our project. And then Claudio, I'm going to have you, when Bill is done, let's just review the Graham McQueen film. It's important. And then we're going to go to John for his question. Bill, what are your thoughts on what does TAP need to leave people with to reflect on?
Okay. Thank you, Chuck, and I'm anxious to get to John's question, so I'll keep this as brief as I can. But I do want to first acknowledge it's a pleasure to see so many people that I have met through the years in this movement. There's at least a third of you I've had some interaction with, from Stone Hobbit, who just signed off from New Zealand, and David Palmer from Australia, through people across the country. I just want to take a moment or two to relate why we're doing all this and what we hope to be offering to you, and what we hope will be the result of forums like this. We see a need for a community. We see a need for a search for truth. We have Ed began his comments with some musing on what it means to be a truther, when truth sometimes is different to different people. I think, a lot of us are speaking out for more freedom. If we think about what freedom necessarily implies, it must mean that in a free society, people will disagree, because if they don't disagree, there really wouldn't be anything to be free about, would there? So we need to come together in respectful dialogue, and that's what we're trying to create more space for. Our Friday session, coming up this Friday, will be much more devoted to discussion and less to presentation, and so we really want to encourage that. So please come back on Friday for our campfire, where we'll pick up on the same theme, but as I say, it'll be more open-ended. So what are we trying to accomplish with this? We're trying to create in the Truth Action Project a setting for respectful dialogue, for this search for truth, which requires respectful dialogue. And what is it all about? It's not so much, it's really for the purpose of exploring or trying to find what seem to each of us as individuals to be compelling strategies to respond to something that is deeply troubling to us, which Ed has helped us to try to put into words, because sometimes words fail us. Having developed in our own minds strategies, or at least finding strategies that people have proposed which seem compelling to us, particularly in our Friday campfires, which are so far once a month, but we hope to make more frequent. We want to bring together people who are not only proposing strategies, but who are working to implement them, put that within our reach so that we can build a community of activism through the sharing of experiences, ideas, and initiatives. So we have historically in the 9/11 Truth Movement, at least, felt small relative to the size of our problem. In TAP, we've been exploring and struggling to find ways to expand the size of this community, which is in dialogue among its members. And we think we have come upon it, and that's what I wanted to try to relate right now. What we're about to embark upon, as we gradually get a handle on how to simply run a Zoomcast, which most of us had not done before, is we want to, through attracting more volunteers and perhaps some contributions from those of you who see this as important, a little bit of funding, we will expand our ability to run more such forums and more such campfires. And the driving force for this will be partners. Partners can be thought leaders, people like Ed, whose writings many of us have been reading. I didn't get to mention Ed just personally. It was great meeting you with Doug Valentine a couple of years ago, and finally we got you on a TAP show. So I'm really glad to see you and to hear you again. So, but we are looking to do more of these, not partly for the content, but partly to create networks and networks of networks. Each of you who's on this program has a network, be it thought leaders that you're following, friends whom you feel you can trust and talk about these things. We want to strengthen your personal networks, and we want to be a service organization to thought leaders and networks by making them partners. Partners will get a space on our website, and they will interact with us in developing more of this web forum and campfire content. And as we do that, we will be sharing audiences. Each person, we're in touch with 3 or 4 other folks now about upcoming events. And as they publicize our joint event to their followers, and we publicize their event to our followers, their followerships will grow. Our followerships will also grow. And each network will grow, and the network of networks will grow. Why are we doing this? Because most of us we've spent some years trying to build a hierarchical organization without realizing that that's what we were doing. And it wasn't easy, because the more you try to build a hierarchical organization, the more open you are to disagreements and paralysis. And as Jim Roguski, a friend of ours who's been on this webcast several times, says, sometimes it seems as though organizations exist for the purpose of making sure that nothing gets done. Well, through what we hope to achieve through this network of networks is to be a resource for people who are building their own networks. And while we won't have a hierarchical organization, we won't become a political party. Someday, when the shit hits the fan, and we don't know just when it will be, networks of networks will make it easier for natural leaders to arise, to become legitimate spokespeople. New structures will be created, but we think that through this method, we can elicit kind of the democratic sense of what the best strategies are. We hope that gradually consensus will arise, and these sessions that we're organizing become a place to test ideas and develop that kind of consensus. So specifically, as you come on, you'll get to know one another. I see many of you that have been on with our programs before. Keep coming. Bring in your friends, help us to expand the network of, and so that they can do the same. And as we grow, we encourage each of you to step forward and volunteer whatever skills you have. As I say, we're focusing right now on more campfires, more forums. We need writers for our newsletter. We're expanding. We need multiple editors for our website. So. And we need especially more partners. If you belong to a group, think about whether they should have a website on our website, and that's where how we hope to expand. And of course, we're always open. We need some donations to keep the lights burning here so that we can produce what we have done. That's all for me, and I'll turn it back to Chuck so you can call on John, hopefully, and others with questions. Thanks.
So thank you, Bill. I've asked Claudio to hold the trailer to the McQueen film, and I'd like to play it, but we're going to go straight to Q&A. People have been very patient, and I know there are questions. So let's go to John Olson from Maine. And what are your thoughts on all that you've heard tonight, John?
Okay, quite a bit. First of all, I'd like to let Ed know that my background also was in existential philosophy, particularly Jean-Paul Sartre. And one important concept was bad faith, which dealt with the psychology of self-deception, which is an interesting topic on its own. I will also mention, as far as organizing, Merrill Nass has a new organization called Door to Freedom, like sort of a catch-all where a lot of things can be done together, short things rather than enormous presentations. So Door to Freedom from Merrill Nass, who's our great COVID liberator. I'll also mention that I was a good friend of Jim Douglas back in the late 60s rather, in Hawaii. We were anti-imperialist activists together, and so I know him very well, and I'm still in contact occasionally. So I have a couple of questions. One is, does Ed think that John Kennedy Jr. was assassinated with that airplane dive? Second question is, any comments about the Arab countries' restraint given the terrific genocidal attacks on Gaza? So I've kept it short. I hope other people will do the same. Ed, your comments, please.
Sure. John, those are great questions, really. I know you were friends with Jim, too, long ago. And the first question is, do I think JFK Jr. was assassinated? And my answer is yes, I do. Definitely. I say that a few weeks before, he and his wife and his wife's sister, as I recall, that died in that plane crash. He was here in the town, the little town in Western Mass where I live, and I went into the local bakery to get some bread, and I was standing behind his wife, and he was outside in the car, and that was the last time I had any encounter with him. But I do think he was assassinated. I think there's a lot of evidence, but that is one of the unspeakables. You're not supposed to say that because they'll say, "Oh, you're a nut. You're really a crazy person." Now you're saying that, but I think there's plenty of evidence to show that. And secondly, the Arab countries' restraint. I don't think they want full-scale war, and I think they're holding back, and they're holding back to see what Israel will continue to do, and what the United States will do. But they will come in, and the whole thing could just go crazy if the United States and Israel doesn't stop at some point. And I think, it's not, Biden, basically asked Netanyahu to stop. He asks him, and what's his name? The Secretary of State goes over there and
Blinken.
He goes over and he asks, supposedly. I mean, this is just pathetic, but I think they're just holding back at the moment. But the whole Arab world is united against Israel and the United States now.
But they speak out, but they're not doing anything, except that some of the logs from Hezbollah, they'll shoot a few rockets down, but there doesn't seem to be anything really
so far
effective at stopping Israel from genocidal attack.
Right.
Thank you, John. There's no hands up right now. Claudio, let's go ahead and run the preview, the trailer to the 9/11 movie with Graham McQueen, and then that might spawn some questions. So we are going to I think we said 2 hours, but if there's, we could close this down sooner, but think about reflections for Ed. Let's play the trailer. It's a very important film. Go for it. Thank you, Claudio.
People say you can't abolish war, it's with us forever. I say, well, we haven't tried very hard yet. Don't think about war as an event or a series of events. Think about it as a system, tumor on human society. And as something that people die for and kill for and create all kinds of havoc for. It profits people. It profits companies. It profits elites. And this group of hawks was very influential in the 9/11 events and what came after that. The American people are willing to fight wars if their blood is up, if their blood is boiling hot. Well, what is it that triggers that phase change? This created mass murder. In public, 3,000 people were killed.
A huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
It was a horrific crime, and it was extremely shocking to people who watched it.
We have an enormous explosion now in the remaining World Trade Towers center. Boom, 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 boom. And as the bombs were going, people just started running. I just turned around and I just started running for my life.
A terrorist attack is an attack that is meant to cause terror, especially politically useful terror. The question is, who were the terrorists?
Americans reasonably wonder, how long will it last? The answer is that many of these changes we made are permanent, at least in the lifetime of most of us.
Momentous. So international, I see 9/11. Someone should make, maybe Bill could. Bill, tell us about Ted Walters. What's the name of the organization that he's advancing? Center for 9/11. I didn't write it down. Who can say it? Bill, give us a word about Ted Walters and his organization, what his ambition is, and how he got behind that movie and Graham McQueen.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
It's International Center for 9/11 Justice.
International Center for 9/11 Justice. Thank you. Ted Walters was a friend. What do you know about Ted Walters and that organization, Bill?
Well, I saw him a couple of weeks ago up in our neighborhood, and we are going to get together soon. I can't really speak for him, but what you've shown in this clip, showing how they're building on the work of Graham McQueen and many others, shows the importance of continuing to keep the search for 9/11 truth in the public sphere. So we look forward to having them do a joint webinar with us at some point in the future, as we have in the past with Richard Gage, and we'll continue to do so. So we encourage you to follow them, support them, and it's an example of our extending our network of communities.
Thank you, Bill. Let me make a remark about. I talked to Ed earlier today, and in the truth movement, there's a tendency to kind of get divided around, what's true. What really happened at the Pentagon, what really happened with the towers, what really happened with even Building 6 now. And I've never really thought about Building 6 until the Lahaina fires occurred. And Jim Roguski made a point on one of our presentations. I think in our movement, we don't need to get lost in the woods, I suppose is the metaphor, around the fact of the big lie, and that the evidence of cover up, in my opinion, is sufficient to make the case that our government is not being responsible. And there's a constitutional duty. Everyone takes an oath to protect the general welfare. I mean, I take my oath. I've been elected to office. I'm serving in Congress as a senator, and I promise to look out for the general welfare. Well, along the way comes all these events, and our senators and Congress people don't stand up for the general welfare. There are a few individuals over time that have, and I'll just remark, Cynthia McKinney was quite active as a congresswoman from Georgia and did grill Donald Rumsfeld over, to the extent that she could in the time she had as a congressperson. So I am interested in the movement and the things we can say to make critique, to galvanize people to engage in a truth politics. Do you have a thought? There are some hands coming up now. I see Ellen has one, and I'm going to certainly welcome her question, and I'm going to insist on a 2-minute max to reflect and question. But Ed, do you have a reflection or a thought on what I just said about it being sufficient to see the cover up to establish that something profoundly wrong has happened? Or do we need to know the absolute truth before we can make a criticism?
No, I don't think we have to know all the details. Jim Douglas's book is dedicated to two guys, Vince Salandria and Marty Schatz. Vince was a lawyer from Philadelphia. Marty, who died a few years ago, wonderful guy, and Marty is a psychiatrist from Massachusetts. And Marty has this idea, a great, brilliant idea. It's called pseudo debates, and it's once we know enough about a particular issue, we don't have to be debating all of the details. And once you see the cover-up of an event, you know that the big lie is a big lie. And now the mass media and the government or the intelligence agencies, they're all basically one thing, are in it together. And that's true for all these events we've been talking about. JFK, MLK, Bobby Kennedy, the father, 9/11, we can go down a long list. The cover-up's there to see. And COVID, of course, every day in the news. And every day now, the whole assault on Gaza. And they're playing a big game with this now, the media, a big, big game, the poor Palestinians, blah, blah, blah. But, and you can see it if you pay close attention. So I agree.
So I'd like to talk about cognitive dissonance, but let's go to Ellen. And Ellen, you are a fount of knowledge. I'm going to request that you could pose a thesis statement and give some details, and then pose a question for us to ponder. Okay.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Chuck. I just really appreciate this group and Edward Curtin. I just discovered your book, and I basically am researching all this deep state, and just more recently have gotten involved with this green liberty movement with Chuck and John. And where is the how can we? It seems like all four parties are completely corrupt. I think controlled by the Israel propaganda, surveillance, Cambridge Analytica, social media. And so I'm just always asking the question, how do we get, reform our government, our parties, we've got to do something, because otherwise I think it's like the Fourth Reich. And, it just is so scary. It is existential because it's like deep, this deep history. I started with Peter Dale Scott and 9/11, but the fact that we don't know what we're doing and we're lying to ourselves. So some comments on that would be good, but also specifically the parties. There should be regulations and things like that.
Those are great questions, Ellen. And I'm going to just help you out here because there's two pieces of what she asked. One, what are your thoughts on somehow navigating the corruption of parties that are in effect bought and owned? But the other piece is what is the nature of the plutocracy? Are the Jews doing this to us, or is there something that transcends just one ethnic group and in terms of the power structure? So there's two pieces of this. Is Israel the leader of these events, or is it a vassal state too? This distinction. So there's two pieces. Reflect on the nature of political parties in the country, and then reflect on the nature of the plutocracy and the power behind the military-industrial complex. Go for it, Ed. Let's give Ed a dedicated spotlight for this.
Well, the answer to the political parties is they're essentially hopeless, and I don't know what can be done except that they're corrupt to the core, and it's really two parties that run this this whole system of so-called democracy and voting. And all you have to do is look at the history of the last presidential elections since 1980 to know what we're up against. So I don't hold much hope to reform the system. I really don't. An old friend, Daniel Berrigan, Jesuit priest, he always liked to repeat the saying that if voting changed anything, they'd make it illegal. And I think it goes back to Emma Goldman, I believe. But the second part of the question, Chuck, just remind me what it was.
Well, I'm asking you to reflect on the power behind. What is the nature of the power behind plutocracy, the ruling elite, however you want to frame it?
Well, when you said, are Jews behind it, and then mentioned Netanyahu or the Israeli government, I make a very sharp distinction between Jewish people and the Zionist government in Israel. I think they are not even close to being the same thing. I know they're not, because I get so much mail and contact from Jewish people all over the world who agree with many of the things I do and say. I think there are Zionist forces, political forces, just like there are in the United States. There are ruling elites, and that's true in Israel. And for the world at large, yes, there are connections for sure across the countries between very, very wealthy people who control the arms industry, they control finance, etc. But I don't think it's one ethnic group at all. I think it's just a grouping of very, very bad people doing bad things. So I think it's a really important distinction to make.
I appreciate that, and I want to. So this is. I think I am an advocate for clinical language that speaks to the problem of power structure. So when I criticize Israel, I'm criticizing Israel, the nation state. I mean, I understand there's an ideology of expansionism by a Zionist philosophy. I get that, but I prefer to and so on. And my inclination is to look at Israel as a vassal state of the NATO, American Anglo power structure. I kind of stop it going beyond, the banking cartels. I mean, that's enough power right there. And as you observe, you have no confidence in an electoral reform movement, electoral revolution, even if we could. But Ralph Nader does say, if we swapped out all of the members of Congress with people committed to political truth, historical truth, and humanitarian values and justice, we possibly could do something quite remarkable. So I'm not to say that you're arguing or dismissing that. You just know that that's a pipe dream in some respects. But do you have a thought, Ed? And then I have another remark to make, and then we can open some questions.
Well, I think, Ralph does and has done a lot of good for the country, and he's a wise man, and he means well, and I think he's a good person. Yeah. We have structural problems. They're very, very deep, and I just, I don't have solutions for them. I wish I did, but I don't.
That's fine.
Simple as that.
We're asking you to just reflect and think, and you do, and you give us your role is to normalize talking about this stuff, and right now that's what we need more than anything. And that leads me to my point about cognitive dissonance. I've posted into the chat an essay I composed, and it's basically a reflection on pieces of Francis Scher's long essay that's posted at the Architects for and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And Fran is on this call, and I'd love to have her kind of just, maybe she would respond to the problem of advancing political truth in communities where there's absolutely no listening. It's just absolutely just flabbergasting. And I've also grappled with, the claim that COVID vaccines are safe and effective. If all you read is mainstream media, then you would believe that they're safe and effective. But if you go alt media, then you find out that, well, that doesn't seem to be true. So you introduce this, and families have been divided over 9/11. They're divided over, do I take the vaccine or not? And we can probably kind of come to, well, I'm reflecting on grappling with wanting to be speaking truth into communities where there's absolutely no listening. And I'll just close with this, and I'll just back to the Fran Scher article. One of her chapters is about those people that are knowledgeable about state crimes, people who are knowledgeable that, yeah, the government does lie to us. Yeah, the government probably didn't, Oswald didn't really do it. There was more to it. People with a remote drop of skepticism are the ones who are most psychologically capable of navigating the big lies and the shoals of cognitive dissonance. Do you have a thought on the cognitive dissonance problem? And if Shan wants to chime in, and we definitely get her on the stack to share out and reflect if she's available for that. Ed, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's very true. People who are skeptical about certain aspects of these big lies also are very open to really accepting them. I'll give an example, and it's maybe unfair, but as some of your listeners may know of this book, it's Conspiracy Theory in America.
Oh, Lance DeHaven Smith. Perfect.
So it's an excellent book. It's an excellent book, and I've referenced it before. But then in the back of the book, Lance has his table where he evaluates these crimes, state crimes against democracy, he calls them, and he says in his far column, degree of confirmation of government role. And so he has the assassination of President Kennedy, degree of confirmation of government role, medium, assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald, medium, assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy, low. And so here, here's a guy, he writes a great book, but his conclusions in the tables at the end, how could it be medium? How could it be low when there is so much evidence that the opposite is the case, that they're all high? It doesn't make sense, but I do think that a lot of smart people, and again, maybe I'm being unfair, but that always struck me in that book. Maybe I'm being unfair to him because I admire his book, but a lot of smart people, they're very susceptible to the big lie, and a lot of educated people. I mean, the schools that I have taught in, the colleges, I would be mocked by my colleagues, even though I knew way more than they did about all of these issues and taught about it. But they would call me the conspiracy theorist, as if, I was some kind of like nutcase.
I want to comment that the reason that this material is so hard to get across is because to understand it, one has to open to the possibility of a profound level of evil. And that's not something that the modern mind is equipped to hold. I wonder if you might seek to address that, Mr. Curtin.
I would be happy to. I think you're correct, 100% correct, because we are dealing with evil at the deepest level. And one of the things I was going to note earlier is that it's very interesting to me that David Ray Griffin, the great author on 9/11, an inspiration for a lot of people, Graham McQueen also, and Jim Douglas has something in common. And what they have in common is David Ray Griffin is a theologian, an eminent theologian, wrote over 50 books. Jim Douglas is a theologian, and Graham McQueen is a Buddhist scholar, trained at Harvard and teaching in Canada. I would add, well, I said, I'm not putting myself in their category, but I was trained in theology also. And I think it takes some, the reason that it's hard to grasp this stuff is that, as you just said, it's evil so deep. How could someone blow a man's head off like that, Kennedy? How could they kill all those people? How could they wage a Vietnam War like that? How could they kill 3,000 of their own citizens in the towers and on the planes and so forth? How could anyone do this whole COVID operation and the propaganda? Where does this come from? How could, we could go on and on. I mean, the list is endless. This
Nazi mentality.
What's that?
Nazi mentality.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, how can you kill 5,000, 6,000 children in Gaza over a month, 5 weeks, and not even blink, say we're going to finish the job?
Okay. I don't know if Ed got that question. Bill, I'm looking for hands. Ellen asked a question. Her hand is still up. However, Bill Jacoby has a hand up. I've asked Fran Scher, if she's still on the call with us, if she would just share a reflection on advancing the truth movement. You're most welcome if you would. But meanwhile, Bill, do you have I'm not sure that Fran will be able to.
Yeah, Fran is waving her hand.
Yeah, let her speak.
Well, then let's get the spotlight on Fran.
Here, can you hear me?
Yeah, there you are.
Welcome, Fran. So delighted that you're here.
Thanks, Chuck. It's so funny. I have yet to figure out how to put out my electronic hand.
It's down there at the reactions button.
Okay. All right. I'll search for it next time.
Yeah. Good. Welcome. What are your thoughts, especially on cognitive dissonance and speaking truth into a community where there's no listening?
Well, I'd like to let you all know, let Ed know, because he probably doesn't know, that I've written this very long serial essay called "Why Do Good People Become Silent or Worse About 9/11?" And I wrote it, first of all, architects and engineers asked me to start writing, so I did, and then I couldn't stop. And it was a collaborative experience. All sorts of people gave me ideas. I'm a psychotherapist, retired psychotherapist, so the psychology is my biggest interest. And to tell you the truth, I explored all the reasons and all the psychological research I could find about this, and then explored the media, what happened to our media. And I still don't know. None of my family will speak to me about 9/11. All of my grown children, not one of them will speak to me about 9/11 to this day. And
Wow.
they get my essays. They know I'm writing this. So I think it's with each individual, you have to do a deep interview with them to see what it is. And I can tell you this, in my opinion, it always comes down to fear. It's fear of being confused, fear of cognitive dissonance, which would make us confused, make us feel helpless. It would challenge our view of our country. It would challenge this American exceptionalism. It's fear of being ostracized by our family and friends if we become a conspiracy theorist, you know. So I consider this whole thing, it's really a psycho-spiritual search. And to be on a psycho-spiritual path, we have to rise above fear, whatever our fear is. And how do we advance this movement? I really cannot tell you. I don't know. The only thing I can say is how important it is for each individual to do their own, to grow in their own way. And I think one of the main ways to grow is to learn how to communicate constructively. How do you have a civil conversation with someone who disagrees with you? Even in my family, most of those people in my family don't know how to do this. And I'm still learning in my elder years, you know, how to do this. So all I can say is grow individually, and then apply what you learn to your relationships. So
what about thinking for yourself? When you say grow, the problem is it's easier to follow something to make it comfortable for your beliefs. But what about thinking? Say, does that make sense?
So what about just thinking for yourself? He's making an existential demand on each individual to just think for themselves, respond to that, and then we have to go to some other questions. But and I know Ed might have a reflection on what you're sharing with us, Fran. It's important. Go ahead.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, it's very good. How about thinking for ourselves? Well, I think that's very important. How many of us can admit that we're wrong? If we see evidence that contradicts our belief in something, how many of us can admit that we're wrong? What does it mean to admit that I'm wrong? Does it mean I'm wrong as a person? Or that I just got something wrong and I have to be a little confused for a while? How secure am I as a person that I can admit that I'm wrong about something? Can I look into the evidence about something that contradicts what I believe? Or do I want to avoid that at all costs? Because my world would be turned upside down if I found out it was not true. You know, so each of us has to, first of all, we have to look at that fear. We're human beings, and each of us has fear. That's part of being human. So we have to face our own fear and rise above it, whatever it is for each of us. So yes, we have to think for ourselves. And sometimes it's a very fearful thing to do.
Thank you,
so
Fran.
I'll pass that on to Ed and Chuck.
I want Ed to just give a brief reflection on what Scott said about people thinking for themselves, about the work Fran is doing, what you just heard, and then we're going to go to we have other hands up, and we will let others ask questions. Ed, just a brief reflection on this. What comes up for you?
Okay, I'll talk fast. First of all, Fran, I've read every word you've written, and I think it's profoundly good. So, and what you just said, I agree with entirely. It's a psycho-spiritual journey, and I think all of us must enter onto that path. Let me quickly give you two examples of people. I know two people very close to me. One was a terrorist, anti-terrorism detective in New York, who was the main guy on the day of 9/11, over in a helicopter over the buildings, and his life was at risk and blah, blah, blah. So I asked him a year ago, I said, I won't mention his name, what have you thought about, your life was at risk and, ever since 9/11, you know what he said? I never think about it. And the other person I know worked in one of the towers on the 103rd floor in the South Tower. And he was on vacation that week, and he would have been dead. 247 people in his office died. And I said, what have you thought about, all these years? He said, I never thought about it.
And that's to protect his psyche from facing an unspeakable topic. Right.
And they're two great people. I can attest to that. Wonderful people.
Okay. Let's so we're going to go over our 2 hours. We're going to keep the recording on, which is fine. And so let's go. I see Spider has his hand up. Sandy has her hand up. Bill's had his hand up. If Diane Perlman, who's also a psychologist, wants to reflect on this problem of speaking into a community where there's no listening, this is kind of an existential task for the truth movement. Spider, what's your question? Let's give Spider the spotlight, and then be ready for a reflective answer. Ed, Spider, go for it. You got to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Let's get the spotlight on Spider, please.
Well, this is, I think, a pretty unique circumstance in that we have Ed and Fran together, and I just can't let this go. Ed was challenged with a comment about the human lack of ability to really contemplate ultimate evil. And I really think this is crucial. It's the kind of discussion that doesn't happen almost at all in any of these discussions about deep state and state crime and that sort of thing. But I think the deep state has a very good handle on just exactly how human beings are going to react in these situations. So I think it's very important that it does get discussed in detail. And I would like to hear Ed he kind of got cut off when he was responding to the other question about ultimate evil. I'd like to have him expand on that if he could. And then if Fran has anything to add, I would love to hear it.
Okay, thank you, Spider. Ed, a deeper reflection.
Yeah, I agree, Spider. That's it is something that's often not discussed and is very important. I'm no expert on answering this. It's a very difficult question. I think it's very hard to contemplate that within every human being, there really is this propensity to do very evil things and good things as well. And that nothing human should be, I'm quoting someone, should be alien to us, even the most heinous person. And it's hard. It's always been hard for me to actually accept that. And Jim Douglas is always trying to, help me along that path, because I tend to think, someone who does evil things, even though I say I'm a nonviolent person, I get really angry and I'd like to, quote, kill them. But of course I don't. And So I think it's you have to recognize what's in yourself as to begin with. But I don't know. I don't really have an answer. These atrocities down through history, they just boggle my mind. You hear about child molesters and mass killers and Hitlers, and I don't know. I wish I did. So I can't really answer your question. I'm just stupefied. I'm stopped in my tracks. I don't.
Do you realize? Wait a minute. Do we realize the advancements in DNA can tell you some of these answers? My wife.
So that was Scott, and he just got muted. We have hands, and we are going to follow the order of hands that are showing. So Diane is present. She has her hand up. But we're going to go to Sandy and Fran. Spider asked for you to reflect on this. We can loop back around to you. So just hold your thoughts, and maybe you would give us a reflection. But let's go to Sandy, and then I see Diane's hand up. Sandy, what is your thought? You've been patient. What? Go for it. And let's put the spotlight on Sandy, please.
Wow. Well, getting into this unspeakable evil is just has muddled my brain at this point. Because I think that, yeah, we as human beings have potential of everything within us, but somehow it's our life experiences that bring out the evil. And what I wanted to bring up was, I have a dream that this whole thing will become networked into all through the United States, where people will come together with the same idea. I don't know how many of us there are, but I think there's at least 30% in the country that think along our lines. And Ilhan Omar tried to pass a bill today that she's trying to get across Congress, which is censorship. And she's just furious about the censorship of our newspapers and globally for what's happening in Palestine. And the other thing is the AIPAC, ADL, and other organizations that are putting all this money into things, and the money in politics. And these two issues, I don't know how we can go further into fixing the system while we still have Citizens United active and money in politics and lobbyists and all this shit going on. Is there a game plan with you guys? Do you have something in mind, a goal, a direction to take that has tools that we can use? I mean, I'm so sick of calling Congress, calling the representatives, calling the White House, signing petitions, going out and protesting, and nothing gets done. Look how we protested with Iraq. And the inhumanity that we're going through right now, and the fact that at least 11,000 children or people have been killed, half of them children, by monsters bombing them in hospitals. And so many in the world are supporting this. And talk about unspeakable evil. I mean, it's blatant now. People aren't even hiding their evil. And I'm wondering is there some direction that we can take I end up shutting down because I can't take it at a certain point, and I have to just back off. And anyways, that's so basically.
I'm going to respond to that, Sandy, because you're making a direct appeal to TAP. We don't have answers. We're not directly dialed in as a political organization. We're primarily educational, civic oriented. We want to, but what we know and what we're dialed in with is an awareness that we need to build our locals. We need to build communities such as the one meeting right now on the Zoom call locally, and those locals need to grow and build a network across the country. And there's a host of things that could be applied for. The bottom line is we are trying to start a national conversation about political historical truth in order to advance a better society. So I'm just going to so don't despair. You are in community. We need to engage with others. And that's the bottom line. So I want you to know that there are other communities also doing this work, and people I'm involved with different networks, as are others here. So just hold that thought, be present with us, don't alienate, don't despair, but be confident and stand in the right of truth. And that's what this group is all about. A lot of hands are still up. I'm going to go to Diane. Diane, what do you think about what you're hearing? I mean, we're going pretty deep.
The lady in whose house we were in Washington, Diane.
So we're listening to, yes. Thank you, Bill. Diane, you've got the floor. Thank you for putting
Right. So I'm just going to make a few comments responding to things that people said. First of all, David, also I want to acknowledge David for helping me write with my Substack and encouraging my work. And good to see you. So he asked a question about why people don't want to face evil. And in addition to what Fran said, also good to see you, Fran. People have mentioned you to me. It's that people are terrified to feel unprotected, that they want to look up to have these institutions like the CDC and the FDA to protect us. So the thought that we can't trust them, that we don't have someone to trust us, is frightening. I mean, also, that's just one factor. And I remember Fairbairn, child analyst, said, like, people would rather be bad than weak. And I think there's also a gender part, because I'd rather be weak. There's a big gender component to everything we're saying. Then the thing about evil, first of all, I do not agree that it runs through every human heart and that every person is capable of evil. So, I studied whistleblowers like Dan Ellsberg and the people like Mandela. So there's certainly people that we know who are who are evil does not run through their heart and they can resist it. So it's not, I don't think that that's true. And then also, like, there's the banality of evil. And I just watched a movie about Hannah Arendt on Canopy, and I was driving to CHD in Atlanta last week, so I got Origins of Totalitarianism. But she said, what really struck her about Eichmann is what a nobody he was. So I think a lot of the people that are carrying out the massacre in Gaza, which is horrifying, well, one is they're following orders. But the other thing is that they're so gripped by a belief that they have to do that there's no choice, and that they have to do that. And one in the 90s, I started studying human development. Well, it's off and on human development, but Lovinger's theory and of ego development. And I came across one thing that 50% of the population doesn't have abstract thinking. So, and also things like perspective taking, like to imagine like what another person feels in an adolescence, but also children can see things from another point of view. So there's like a perspective exercise, like Piagetian thing. So like, I see it this way, but if you're sitting there, you see it that way. So, and the people in Israel, I mean, one is they're completely regressed and freaking out and concrete, and they absolutely believe that they have to, they have no choice but to kill Hamas, or Hamas is going to kill them. And I've written about psychology of terrorism, and that killing terrorists is like the opposite of eliminating terrorism, and that it has the law of opposites. But people, normally decent people with their heart of hearts and may have abstract thinking in some domains, are just completely concrete right now. And then I remembered there's a psychoanalyst named Chris Bolus, and a few decades ago he did a thing on he wrote something called The Structure of Evil, and it was about serial killers, that he wrote a thing about them. And what happened was that when they were children, they experienced something like a soul murder, And then when they became adults, like someone who was naive and innocent, who represented their child innocence, they would do a traumatic reenactment where they would have mastery. And they would like take care of them, and they would be nurturing, and they would win them over and have them look up to them and feel taken care of by them. And then they would, reenact the soul murder. And he said they're like an airhead. They're naive and trusting. So those are a few of my thoughts about the points that came up. And thanks for asking me.
Thank you, Diane, for the reflection. We're going to close. We're going to wrap up, and we're going to go to Fran. And if Ellen's hand is still up because she has something she wants to say, or a question, and then I would welcome that. However, I think we're done kind of lecturing each other around history and so on. But Fran, what's your thought? What are your reflection on this? Is the deep psychological struggle of advancing a truth movement, and we could spend all evening talking about the power of a trauma event to induce people to accept false narratives. Fran, and you've written about that. What's your thought, Fran? Let's put the spotlight on Fran, please.
Well, I'm going to just say something and then ask you to repeat the question.
No, yes, go.
I would like to recommend, if people have not read the book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism by Matthias Desmet. I think it's really very, very shocking and interesting to read about what happened in history when there were mass formations, mass movements. And we've seen it right here in the last 3 years with COVID. People became very, very ugly around COVID. And we saw it happening with that narrative around COVID. I was shocked to hear what happened in the Soviet Union. Mothers putting nooses around their sons' necks, people pulling people off the streets to kill them just because they hadn't killed enough people yet to advance the Bolshevik revolution. I mean, it was amazing to read this to me. I learned so much. How do we advance the 9/11 truth movement? I just don't know what to say except for each person to advance themselves. I had to go into therapy. When I first learned about 9/11, I had so much anxiety that I couldn't sleep for several weeks. So I knew enough about myself to know that it was coming from early trauma. So I got into therapy and I identified where that trauma was coming from, and I've worked through much of it. And then I could do the same organizing, the same work, but without this need to shake people to get them to hear me, without the need to shake people and get them to hear what I have to say. My goal when I talk to people is to connect with them. It's not to tell them they have to believe what I'm saying or they have to look at this. It's just to connect with them. And that's just what I do. And so I don't know how to advance the movement. Like I say, it's a psycho-spiritual journey, and that's an individual journey for each of us. Okay. So I think I have to end there, Chuck.
No, you're fine. That's a perfect place to end. And I'll just answer you, though, that TAP is a collective journey. We are all individually doing the work. That's absolutely correct. But TAP is a community to reflect together and advance dialogue. And a whole bunch of stuff has been introduced this evening. And one of the central questions is, how do we speak with each other in the face of an unspeakable topic? So we're winding down. We're going to actually do a formal end of recording. There'll be a closeout little script of, and then we're going to stay on for chit chat. But I'm going to give Ellen a chance, and then Bill Jacoby, our founder, is going to get the final kind of remark. Ellen, do you have a reflection or a question, something to leave us off with?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just, I've gotten value out of the truth group. I don't know if you have something like that with TAP, but being able to share with, Diane Perlman and Sandy Swanson over the last few weeks has been really valuable because it deals with that fear and, that anxiety and, but just fear of speaking out and, especially by something like anti-Semitism, and when you're talking about evil, it's difficult. And so that's why this is very valuable. And
thank you, Ellen.
We also did something like that before. Okay, thank you.
And I'll just say that David Schoenbrunn is participating, and I participate in the Truth Group. I advertise this on Truth Group, and I've approached Dr. Laura, and it's conceivable that the Truth Group community could advance a topic in the genre of truth, and we could bring that into the TAP forum. And these are the kinds of partnership relationships TAP wants to have. And Truth Group is not the only Truth Group. There's many Truth Groups. A lot of people doing, and the people on the TAP board are involved with different groups. So we do want to build partnerships. Truth Group could be a partner. That's a thought. So
do you have an interactive mailing list?
No,
that
we don't have a list.
Like
We don't have a list discussion. No, we have postings but we're not there. So that's a whole nother discussion, and we welcome participation. We are a volunteer activist group, and we're trying to grow and trying to build intersection and build a movement. Just difficult as it's hard to conceive, it is something out there. So we're going to go give Bill a remark, and then I'm going to turn finally to Ed, actually, and then we're going to do our closeout at outro, and then we're going to stick around for anybody who wants to chit chat. Bill, give us a reflective thought, and then you're going to hand it off to Ed for his wise words.
Sure. Just as has been said, everybody has to go on their own quest. Ain't nobody here can do it for you. You've got to walk that lonesome valley for yourself. But we are also social animals, and we need community to proceed. One truther told me one time about going to a meeting in a household in North Carolina, a gathering of truthers, about 6 or 7 of them, and one person there was from New Jersey, and he asked her, "Why have you come to this meeting in North Carolina from New Jersey?" And she said, "Well, I learned about 9/11 truth, and I started blabbing about it to everybody. And in 24 hours, I lost all my primary relationships. So I've driven all this way just to find somebody who will tell me I'm not crazy." So that's kind of an extreme example, but we do need one another. Secondly, the truth is elusive. People do see truth in different ways. For me, a formative experience was being in the Peace Corps for 3 years. I just learned to think like a Peruvian. And Peruvians are just like everybody else, but they're also completely different in ways that I can't say. So when we put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and in somebody else's context, we see that things which might to us have seemed like absolute truths are just a little bit different when you look at them from a different angle. And that's why respectful dialogue and what we've had tonight, I think, is an example of it. But the other thing, I think some people probably on the call are feeling a little frustrated that we didn't come up with an action plan. What can we do to change the world? Well, we have had people on other calls, and some of them their friends are on this call, and they will be back, who are involved in action and who are testaments to what an individual can do. James Roguski and Meryl Nass were on our first broadcast. I know Meryl has an organization now that we should all get on to and support, but before she had an organization, Meryl was just Meryl doing her research by herself, and she was reaching an incredible number of people. James Roguski he's the one who said to me that being on organizations seem to exist to keep things from getting done. And he's the best evidence for that position. I don't agree with it, but it's a good position to take, because he's reshaping the world's approach to the World Health Organization, and is basically doing it on his own, talking with people one-on-one. We've had on this call two people from Costa Rica. They're Americans in Costa Rica called Interest of Justice. And they've just gone through a hearing in the highest levels of the Costa Rican judiciary, where they have universal jurisdiction, and they've had Mike Yaden working with them to prosecute the people in the Costa Rican government who foisted mandates on that one country, which could have international implications. We've had them on. We need to have them back, and we need to be inspired by them and see where we can help them and see what their courage and their initiative can suggest. And we don't have to buy into absolutely everything. Some people we're going to continue to disagree because we're all humans and we love freedom. And none of us ought to surrender our freedom just for the sake of agreeing and being part of a group. That's where Matthias Desmet's book is, to me, so meaningful. He speaks about mass formations, but he says we must guard against fighting against it by forming our own mass hallucination and going off in that direction. So, but as we listen, as we network among networks, and we hear more and more of our fellow citizens, fellow human beings speaking out, we are looking for that deeper zeitgeist, and we will find what makes sense to us. And by expressing ourselves, we can help to make things happen the way people like Jim Roguski and Meryl Nass and the Interest of Justice and many other people have done. On so many issues, we see so much good happening now that we shouldn't despair that we can't do anything. We have to find it in ourselves, find it in others, connect with what seems meaningful to us. And we may be we'll be on different tracks, different channels, but the more engaged human beings we become, I think the more we will get to know what our human destiny is and how we can contribute to achieving it.
Bill, thank you for that thought and speaking for the TAP mission and what we're all about here. Let's turn briefly to Ed. Ed, we really appreciate you being here. You've drawn a great crew of activists. Give us a reflection, and then I'm going to make a final remark of appreciation to the TAP team, and then we'll end our recording, but the Zoom will stay on for a while. Ed, what do you think about what you've heard tonight and the grappling and the struggling to find our path?
Well, I think it was wonderful because I learned a lot from listening to people's opinions and knowing that there are so many people who want to make the world a better place and are desperately trying and are losing hope a little bit along the way and need to be buoyed up by other people. And I think that's one thing that happened here. Mm-hmm. I think it was great. I mean, everyone does what they can do.
Right.
Each person has a different talent, usually. And, use the talent you have to contribute to this process of healing this world, which is really spinning out of control. So thanks for having me.
Healing, Ed, I so appreciate that you really clinched it. Why should we do anything at all? And healing the world, being with each other, advancing truth, struggling for a political change, which might never happen in our lifetimes, but that's not a reason we ought not kind of get into the fight. And everybody who's in Truth Group and so on and are entertaining this conversation is a fighter fundamentally. So I want to acknowledge Claudio. You should put your mug up here, get the spotlight on Claudio. And if Trina would get the spotlight on her, these two are activists on TAP, and then David Schonbrun is a Truth Group activist and is part of the TAP Media team. So and I'm grateful. We're all grateful for this team effort. So and Trina, are you going to give us your lovely mug also?
Well, that's up to David.
David, let's get. So Trina's is our manager in effect at TAP. So we are encouraging you to like us, to subscribe, to share, to do all the things that help spread this message. This is a long message for anybody to watch this video. It's been going on well over 2 hours. Maybe we'll get a transcript posted that gets it reduced. But thank you all. And we're going to close out with our TAP outro, and we're going to end the recording, and then we're going to stay open for some chit chat. Thank you all for being here tonight and for struggling and grappling with truth.